This week on London Real, we have former SAS surgeon and disaster medic, Richard Villar.
You want to imagine total destruction. I mean, I don't mean just a few houses down. The only properties I saw intact were two churches made of stone. It was the strongest typhoon ever to have made landfall. And of course the water is contaminated, and so you can't just close up or sew up, suture up a wound when you have that contamination, because you know if you do, you're going to harbour an infection. My job, as it was with Haiti and others, is to be in there as early as I could humanly be, because that's when I'm most used. Everyone was stood for the whole flight. That's takeoff, on the cruise and landing, in turbulence, you are stood. As I talk to you now, I can still see in my mind certain scenes which I would rather not have seen.
London Real presents Richard Villar, disaster medic.
It's a huge responsibility, which personally I take enormously seriously.
Welcome back to London Real. I am reporting to you from the heart of Shoreditch. That is the infamous T building behind me, home to so many startups in the technology sector, and also lots of other Shoreditch businesses. I'm walking along the Box Park here on Bethnal Green Road, and this neighborhood is changing like crazy. You got some high-rise apartments going on up behind me here, and it's pretty buzzy. Rents are going up, but it's still all good. You can see the sun is shining here, which for us Londoners is a bit like kind of zombies. We don't know what to do at first. It's like, oh shit, there's sun. We've had lots of rain here this winter, but we're getting some wonderful, beautiful weather. This week on the show, we welcome back for the second time Mr. Richard Villar, who is an ex-SAS surgeon. And just to be a bit clear about that, the SAS is the Special Air Services, which is like the British Special Forces, probably the equivalent of Delta or the Navy SEALs in the US. And he not only was a member of that regiment, but he was also a surgeon in that regiment, which is quite a big deal. He is now a professional hip surgeon, but when he gets the phone call, he has to travel sometimes within 24 hours, 48-hour notice to disaster zones all over the world. And Richard has been there and done that. He's been to Java after the earthquake. He's been to Haiti after the earthquake. He was even involved in the medical efforts for the Libyan Civil War. And we had Richard on about maybe 9 months ago, and he came on and spoke about what he did in Haiti in 2011 after those efforts. And I got a call from his secretary, and she's like, Richard just got back from the Philippines. He went there for Typhoon Haiyan, and would you like to have him back on the show? And I had two words, and that was hell yeah. So Richard came on, and I had a few notes, but I didn't even get a chance to look at the notes because I was so busy engaged in this conversation and engrossed in this conversation with Richard, because he's just how do I describe it? He's just a bad motherfucker, you know? He's very quiet, very soft-spoken, quintessentially British in his mannerisms, but you just know that this guy can take care of the business when it's necessary. And he basically walked me through his experiences of basically being on vacation in the Lake District here in Britain and getting the phone call from the organization he works for now, which is Save the Children. He used to work for Merlin, and basically going into Manila and then heading out to the disaster zone, and how from basically hour to hour he didn't know what the hell was going on, where he was going to be, where he was going. At one point he thought he was going to get on a US naval vessel and go out to help certain people on other islands, and then he was shifted to where he was actually going to be taking a plane out to a airport that was just totally desolate and decimated. There was nothing left, no structures, no airport, no no terminal building, nothing. And then he gets there and basically has to start operating on people, finding out what the damage is, finding out what the deal is. So I'm totally engrossed in conversation here with Richard. You can see me, I'm just like listening to the greatest story I've ever been told. And I hope you find this fascinating. I know it's a little different than some of our episodes, and you know, it might not be as sexy as Bitcoin, but I mean, this guy has just so much that he can teach us, and I personally find his stuff to be tremendously cool. So I hope you enjoy my time with Richard. Hopefully, you know, we'll have him back on in the future when he goes to the next disaster and we can find out more. It's interesting to me because each one is unique. If it's an earthquake, certain things happen. A typhoon, other things happen. A civil war, other things happen. So it's very cool, and I hope you enjoy that. Just going through a crazy underpass there in Shoreditch, and more sun. As you know, by looking at me, I am bulletproof. Yes, I'm lean, I'm mean. I drink my Bulletproof coffee every morning, which is, if you don't know, coffee that is free of molds and toxins. It is then mixed with grass-fed butter and MCT oil, which is brain octane oil, the best of the coconut oil. And you mix that up in like a frothy latte brew. I drink it. It's my replacement for breakfast in the morning, and I'm a big fan of those guys. They're also biohackers by trade and by nature. And I'm going to be doing a series of videos in the next month or two about sleep hacking, sponsored by Bulletproof. And I've been already hacking my sleep. I've been monitoring my sleep every night with an app on my iPhone, and I can track how much I'm getting, the quality of it, and you know, we're gonna drop these videos, and I hope you guys start doing that. You'll be amazed how much less sleep you're actually getting than you think. So I think that's a huge part of my day. I no longer skip on sleep. I try to get my 7-8 hours every night, and I can tell when I don't have it. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be fun to just drop those videos on you, and thanks to the guys at Bulletproof for sponsoring that. Last but not least, I've got Mr. Sully Breaks back in the studio. Him and I had a one-on-one for an hour plus. I mean, you know, if you saw Sully originally on our show 10 months ago, you know, he is a spoken word artist from London, which, if you don't understand what that is, it's poetry, but spoken out loud. It's not rap because there's no musical track, but Sully, in the matter of 6 or 7 minutes, can drop some serious science on your dome by putting together his verses. And I was really impressed when I first saw his videos. His big one is, or his two big ones, is I will not let an exam result decide my fate, and why, I'll remember the other one. But Will Smith just gave him a shout out on Facebook over Christmas and said, quote, "I'm really impressed with this young man." And what can I say? So am I. So the feeling is mutual. On top of that, Sully is going on his Around the World in 80 Days tour, and he's leaving in like a week or maybe a few days after this video drops. So please check that out. You can go to his website. I'll have a link down here below. And he's basically traveling around the world in 80 days. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could leave London and everything here for even 20 days. But Sully's doing it for 80. He's doing it to learn. He's doing it to progress his art, to learn spiritually, everything. And you know, it's just such an exciting venture. He's going to be tracking it with video and all that good stuff. So fantastic episode. It didn't even feel like work. It was just the two of us hanging out and talking. So I love tracking these videos, knowing that like 10 years from now, when Sully Breaks is a household name, you can go back and watch what the younger Sully was like, and he'd probably be just as cool as he is then. So there you go. I'm going to sign off here. The usual stuff is there. You know, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. It's all good. If you want to contact me, it's brian@londonreal.tv. We got all sorts of people helping out, lots of great volunteers. Thank you for all that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. The best thing you can do, the best compliment, is to refer us to a friend, family member, colleague, and just let them know that there's some other stuff going on out there than what's on the BBC. God bless them. And it's called London Real. So we're here to stay, and hopefully we'll be dropping more cool guests and fascinating ideas on you soon. So now I give you Disaster Medic, Mr. Richard Villar.
Okay, Richard, let's do this.
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. We are sponsored today and drinking Bulletproof coffee, which is a coffee that's free of molds and toxins. You mix it up with some grass-fed butter, much to the surprise of many of my guests. And we also put in some brain octane oil, which is like the best of the coconut. And you mix it all up, and it's kind of a brew, kind of like a yak butter tea. I was explaining to Richard earlier, he's actually had yak butter tea.
I have had yak butter tea.
Okay. Is there any similarity or?
There's a vague taste of yak perhaps in the background, but that's about all. It's very tasty indeed.
Okay, well, you like that. It's a great way to have some coffee. A lot of times I find that normal coffee has some molds and toxins. I feel lousy afterwards, and this has some butters and oils in the morning, and it's kind of my breakfast replacement. Gets my brain working well. So just want to thank the guys at Bulletproof. They're big into biohacking, which is like getting your body to perform better and questioning a lot of the things that we put in our body. Like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I was thinking today, why do we eat those? Maybe because my mom gave me one, but it's just different ways of eating things. So if you want to check them out, their blog is bulletproofexec.com, and you can go to upgradedself.com to pick up the coffee, MCT oil, etc. My guest today is Mr. Richard Villar, who is an ex-SAS surgeon and author of the book Winged Scalpel, which describes the difficulties, dangers, and occasional impossibility of providing medical aid in disaster areas and war zones. You have been to 3 major earthquakes. I believe it's Kashmir in 2005, Java in 2006, Haiti, which you taught me how to pronounce correctly the last time you were here. In 2010, you were at the Libyan Civil War in 2011. You've just returned from the Philippines.
I have indeed.
Where you were there to be on the ground after the typhoon. Richard, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure having you here. You are only one of 3 people who has returned to the show. You're in fantastic company. Graham Hancock, the author of Fingerprints of the Gods, has been one. We had the founder of martial arts, 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, Eddie Bravo, and now yourself. So thanks for being here. Your assistant, Rosie, texted me about a week and a half ago. She said, Richard just got back from the Philippines after the typhoon. Would you like him back on the show? And I had 2 words that I said. I said, hells yeah. So it was an immediate yes. So thanks so much to her, and thanks for coming back.
My great pleasure.
You know, I'm going to cut right to the chase, and I'm just as excited as everyone else watching right now because I don't know anything that happened to you. About a month ago, I think it was like early part of November, I believe it was Typhoon Haiyan.
Yes.
Hit the Philippines. I wanted to know, when did you first hear about the typhoon? When did you know that you might be going in? And then what was the next week of your life like?
Well, it was a very rapidly moving event. I mean, I think the world knew, as did the Philippines, that the Typhoon Haiyan was going to arrive. It's actually locally called Typhoon Yolanda. And so in many respects, there were certain agencies that already had personnel in place waiting to see what might be required. Unlike, let's say, an earthquake, which is totally unexpected,
right.
People knew the typhoon was going to happen.
Like days before it happened?
Yes, it was sure.
Okay.
Days before it was going to happen.
Okay.
But, of course, you're never prepared for the real thing when it happens. You think you're prepared, but you're not. We were not stood by. In fact, I went to a meeting with Save the Children Fund where we were talking about everything other than the typhoon. And that was about, 2 days before the typhoon itself, and so we had an inkling there might be something that might involve us, but no specific detail. But there were personnel actually in country waiting to see what would happen.
Okay. When you were here last time, I was thinking that every time you watch the news, you must be thinking in the back of your mind, am I going to have to go there? Am I going to have to go there? So is this something you kind of saw creeping up, or you were saying you didn't see it?
Well, we knew there was a typhoon, but obviously not.
It's a strange way to live, by the way.
It is. It may well be, but in fact, it's not always. I'm not always as accurate as I might like to think. I mean, I remember on one occasion, having just come back from one earthquake, and I can't quite remember which one it was, looking at the television and seeing there was going to be a tidal wave off the coast of Japan, ringing up the NGO for which I was working and saying, look, we must put everyone on standby for tidal wave. When the tidal wave came in, it was only 18 inches high. And meanwhile, the entire UK disaster emergency response had been stood by. So one has to be slightly careful about what one does. So nothing came of that.
This was many years ago.
This was what? Must have been about 5 or 6 years ago, I think.
Before the big one that had the earthquakes.
Exactly that, exactly that. But no, on this occasion, I was actually climbing in the Lake District. I'd been off for a weekend and I was enjoying myself, and then my mobile telephone went and the request was, and here we are, I think 36 hours after the typhoon, could I be on 12-hour standby to move? So I instantly responded yes.
Can you say no to that?
Well, you can say no,
but you wouldn't.
No, but I mean, you're not on the disaster team if you are the sort of person that says that sort of thing. I mean, in practice, a disaster means you've got to move quickly, and absolutely everything goes by the board. The difficulty, I think, for most UK doctors has been getting the time away or getting their UK job covered while they had been away. Because obviously, in my case, I have a full operating session for 2-3 weeks, however long it may be I shall be away for, and all of that has to be cancelled. So, and at the last minute, and all your poor patients have done all their arrangements, so they had to be sorted out. And so we have in place a facility, a system to cater for that. Within the National Health Service, you've now got locum appointments, locum doctors who can come in, and so the chief executives of many of the UK hospitals are now happy for their staff to go because they know that their places will be covered when they're away.
Okay, but with your practice, you have people that are getting replacement hips.
Yes.
Hips are your specialty? Do you do knees as well?
I do hips and knees.
Hips and knees.
Mainly hips, but hips and knees.
And when they come in to see you, is there a disclaimer saying, I might have to go? Do they already know about you? Because if I was getting my hip replaced and I knew you were going to do it, I would want you to do it.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. No, they know about me, and they know before they even come that the practice with which I form part, the personnel may have to go to a disaster zone on occasion. In reality, going away doesn't happen that much. You're stood by very frequently, but probably once a year or so, you will have to go to a big one.
Okay. All right. So you got the text, you were in the Lake District, you went back and said, I'll be ready, which means within 12 hours, you might have to be on a plane.
Yes, exactly that. Now, at that point, you have no idea if you're going to go for sure, but you've got a pretty good inkling you will be. You're not quite certain who the team is. You're not quite certain which airport you'll have to be going to or how you'll be flying. You simply get yourself ready. Mostly you are ready. Your bag is largely packed. There are a few things that will need to be changed. I suddenly, for example, remembered I'd forgotten to have my typhoid and cholera vaccination, and so suddenly you have to get that at the last minute. But generally speaking, you're on a roll, the system is in place, and you will turn up to meet the others wherever you're told to meet, and turn up to meet them, as it were.
Okay, now for you, does that mean leaving the Lake District and coming back to central London?
Oh, yes.
Does that mean no more whiskey for that evening? I mean, are there certain behaviors you have to change right away?
Well, it's sadly, I'm not a whiskey drinker. Okay. I wish I was, but no, it means, for example, that particular week, I've got a course I'm running in York. The following week, I'm in Copenhagen. So all of that has to be cancelled, or people have to be stood by. Now, I say to my secretaries back at the practice, just cancel the next week. You may think I'm going to be away for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, who knows? But just cancel the next week, because you never really know how long you're going to be away for. They can sometimes be longer than you think, sometimes be shorter than you think.
Right, because the last time you were here, you talked about how your deployment, it's all about the very, very initial phases. You called yourself a medical fixer.
Yeah, surgical fixer.
Surgical fixer, because
right.
you almost get on the scene and you have to make things happen. Like you have to build the hospital sometimes, or like triage in the ultimate sense of what is going on here, triage, as opposed to individual patient triage. But now I'm answering for you.
No.
So oftentimes your deployments are very short?
Oh, I say it depends what you mean by short, but I mean, they're probably about 2 weeks. I mean, for example, this was a two-week trip.
How long was Haiti?
Haiti was just under 3 weeks.
Okay. And this trip was?
This is 2 weeks, roughly 2 weeks.
Okay, 2 weeks. All right.
No, because you see, you have a disaster, you don't quite know what you will be expected to do. Now, on this particular occasion, I wasn't quite the surgical fixer. I formed part of a surgical team. That is, we already had in place individuals who had spotted likely locations, but even those locations they hadn't been to because there was no way of getting in there. So, as it were, we had to position ourselves very near to the action, and that's the point at which you have to make it up slightly as you go along. You know what your skills are, you know what are needed. You may not know precisely where they are needed. You've got a pretty good idea, but not precise enough to send everyone there instantly.
And do you give Merlin feedback? Merlin's the organization you work for, is that right?
Well, yes, on this occasion I worked for Merlin and for Save the Children, and in reality in country, because Save the Children has now purchased Merlin, and so they now form one large organisation. So this was my first ever mission with Save the Children Fund.
Okay, and is it a discussion? Do you talk to them about what you think should be done, or are they kind of very top down? They're like, we really need you here, and you're going to be working with these kind of people.
And there's a lot of discussion. I mean, remember, 12 of us turn up to this. So we all arrive at Heathrow, and there are 12 individuals, and all of them have got experience of this.
Have you met them before, or typically not?
Some of them you have, some of them you haven't. Okay. And so there's some fairly rapid bonding.
Sounds like a Hollywood movie, you know, like the Hangover, but like the, I don't know, whatever, the disaster series. But all right, go ahead.
No, it probably is. So you arrive, and then you're then told of your route. Get hold of some money, some cash is given to you, your equipment is given to you. You take your personal belongings, but the Department for International Development, who've also helped fund this, they provided some extra equipment like sleeping bag liners, knife, fork and spoon, water bottles and so on. So you get given your kit or the extra kit literally at the airport. So you're busy packing everything you possibly can, and then away you go. Now, literally in Costa Coffee in Heathrow, you are given your first briefing, and that first briefing was given by one of the senior members of Save the Children Fund. It was, I have to say, a textbook briefing. If I'd wanted to give a briefing or explain to people how to give one, that was how I would give it. And so you really felt motivated. You know,
okay.
I want to get out there. Now, at that point in Heathrow, you're still 20 hours away from the location. Right. There's a lot of travelling to do. But you've got an inkling at that point what is likely to be expected of you, but even then, not where it is to be expected of you.
What makes a good briefing? If you had to just kind of summarize what that was like, is it short? Is it sweet? Is it motivational? Is it provide details?
No, it's motivational and provides detail. And basically, this individual has had the skill of making you feel he was talking to you, the person, when in fact there were 12, 15 people there. You know, and so every individual felt they were being addressed in a way that most people find it very difficult to do. No notes, nothing at all. Looks you in the eye when he wants to look you in the eye. And no, you feel very motivated. I felt very motivated after that.
And this is coming from an SAS soldier. I'm sure you've heard some
I've
people
had
talk to you.
briefings.
Okay.
And he's up there with the best of them.
And he works for Save the Children.
He does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're given the mission. You're flying off to Manila via something?
Sure. Yeah, well, we knew we were flying to Manila. That was via Kuala Lumpur. Okay. And at that particular point, you then are sat in your economy class seat, and away you go. You change in Kuala Lumpur. We ended up in Manila. And then in Manila, you're met in country by one or two individuals who've been there for a few more days. They have just put out feelers, and they begin to give you a feel of the sorts of things you might be thinking about. This location, there's unlikely to be many casualties. In that location, there's likely to be a lot. These areas have been missed out. These areas haven't, and so on. So you're beginning to get a feel at this stage of what is expected of you.
Okay, talk to me about typhoons. How big was this? And it's such a different kind of damage than, say, an earthquake, I'm guessing, or a civil war. But what did you learn right away about the typhoon and its severity compared to previous ones in the Philippines?
Right. Well, I mean, in terms of meteorology, I know very little. But in terms of the strength of winds, I mean, basically, you don't want to be a strength 5. And this was a strength 5. This was as strong as they get. And as far as we were told, it was the strongest typhoon ever to have made landfall. We knew that it had made landfall not once, not twice, but actually 6 times. Now, we found on the ground, in fact, that yes, a typhoon is enormously destructive, but actually destructive in its route of passage, as it were. So it's not destructive throughout the country, but if you sort of take its main track and then you go, let's say, north and south, I'd say, 60 miles, then it's created extensive damage. Get beyond that, and then there's much, much less damage, and get further away and there's no damage at all. So what you're doing is trying to spot the areas where it has made landfall, and those are the areas that you target.
Was this completely unique compared to your other experiences in Kashmir, in Haiti, as far as the topography and the actual disaster itself?
Yeah, because I mean, it was unique for me, yes, right. Because I'm used to buildings collapsing on people. Now, they collapsed on people in the typhoon, but actually I think the thing that did most of the damage was actually the storm surge afterwards. And so you're looking at a storm surge like a mini tidal wave, but you're many, many meters high, taking out all of this low-lying, coastal, rather ramshackle wooden accommodation. So that's really what did for people. Okay. And so it was more like, I suppose, the 2004 tsunami, where you find there's a lot of fatalities very near to the sea, and then you get a bit further inland and suddenly everybody's alive. And so, yes, you do have injuries, but a lot of fatalities.
Okay, and logistically, can it be more helpful since a lot of the country is still working, as opposed to an earthquake when it must take out like all of Haiti and everything is dysfunctional? I mean, were there still parts of Philippines that could supply you with?
Oh, yeah, so parts of the Philippines which were perfectly okay, but you remember, we've got to get to where the action is, and that was totally destroyed. So, for example, in the area we eventually chose, there is one runway. That runway was blocked anyway with debris. Even when the debris was closed, the runway was so small, you could only park 4 aircraft there. And so you've only got room for 4 aircraft at any one time. So you're flying day and night to try and get aid in.
Wow. All right. So take us to Manila. You're in Manila. You land. You're getting briefings on where you're going to go. What happens next?
Well, you get to Manila and you think, actually, what's all the fuss about? Because Manila is a fantastic city, and you look out the window and you think, surely there's no disaster. But so now some agencies went no further than Manila, and that's where they did their planning from. From our viewpoint, we wanted to get as near to the action as possible. So our decision was to get as near as you could safely get, and that would be when we would make the assessment we required. And so we went from Manila to a place called Cebu, CEBU, and that was our, as it were, center of operations, from which we made our definitive plans.
Now, you said safe. Are you worried about more natural disasters coming your way, as in more of those waves coming through, or more typhoons? Or are you worried about safety?
You're worried about safety, of course you are. In Manila, not at all, not at all. Manila is a lovely place, lovely people. Down to Cebu we went, again, lovely place, lovely people, but you're beginning to feel slightly edgy. You're beginning to trust the weather a bit less. You know, even in Cebu, there are 1 or 2 fallen trees, even though Cebu itself wasn't on the main typhoon track. But you're just beginning to pick up a sense that things are not as they ought to be. And so you've got your wits about you.
Is there a sense of anarchy, and do you sense danger when there's a bit of disorder going on?
Well, in Cebu, there was no sense of that at all. Okay. Once you went from Cebu onwards, yes, you began to get that feeling for sure. And so what we basically decided in Cebu was there would then be, we divide into 2, and one party would, as it were, recce, reconnoiter the local area. Let's go 60 or 70 miles away and see what there was there. And another party would work out were there any other ways in which we could maximize the aid we'd come to provide.
Okay. Now, what do people need from you? You know, when you get there, I mean, what are the injuries, and what are the things happening?
Well, if you take, I mean, let's there we are in Cebu, and we're deciding: do we locate in Cebu? Do we go elsewhere? And we decide there will be certain key areas which were lacking aid. Some of the organizations were already going into a location called Tacloban, and Tacloban, where I think it was the second point where the typhoon had made landfall, and it was completely destroyed. Now, clearly we decided that half of us at least would go there. Originally we just thought, well, actually the islands, remember the Philippines, I think, have got something like 7,107 islands, 2,000 of them are inhabited. And so how do you get to those? And so actually it so happened the Royal Navy had HMS Daring there, and so it was a very good link to be made. And
what is HMS Daring?
HMS, Her Majesty's ship.
HMS,
so there was a Royal Naval vessel in the area. It had been diverted by the government to go there. And so it seemed ideal. Originally, all 12 of us were going to go on HMS Daring, and we were going to provide aid to the islands because they would not have had aid there. Anywhere you could land an airplane, fine, but these places, these islands, had no airstrip at all, and so they simply needed a ship to get there. HMS Daring was a gift from heaven, and so we thought, let's all go, and let's put 12 of us on HMS Daring, and we all arrived, as it were, with our seagoing kit. And then literally 3 hours before we were due to board HMS Daring, we had a message from Tacloban that there was a field hospital there that had just started work and that was desperately short of orthopedic, that's bones and joints, assistance. So half of us instantly diverted from HMS Daring, and we went to this location called Tacloban. So the team is sufficiently flexible. We have a register called the UKIETR, the United Kingdom International Emergency Trauma Register. Now that comprises a lot of individuals who are trained up to go to disasters, and so they should be able to multitask. Okay, I am an orthopedic surgeon, but I guess if you want me to dig a latrine, I will do so. But in practice, you need to be able to divert into different corners of your specialist activity. And so we have a team, suddenly we could divide into 2. One half can provide the islands with support, and the other half, that was the half I belonged to, can go to Tacloban, which is what I did.
Were you disappointed not to go on the boat ride? A little bit?
Well, I mean, did I arrive with my bucket and spade? Almost. I suppose, actually, yes. I mean, there's obviously, you're there to provide aid. It is a critical situation, and you are actually really feeling it for the local people in a big way. And remember that there's a huge link between the Philippines and the United Kingdom. And there's a lot of Filipino people over here who are doing a power of good for healthcare in the UK. So actually, you don't feel you owe it to them, but actually friendship is there. It seems the right thing to do.
Okay.
But yes, I would love to go on to HMS Daring. I didn't go on to HMS Daring, and we got slightly envious of our colleagues who did, because they had nice food and they sat down, they had nice beds. We didn't have any of that.
Okay, so it was a bit of a refuge, a bit of a hotel on water.
No, I would never for one moment say that.
Okay.
But there were comforts they had, we didn't have.
And the Royal Navy is volunteering that kind of a vessel? I mean, that's some serious aid.
No, I mean, the UK government has been big on aid. I mean, I'm the world's most hopeless politician, but you can hear our Prime Minister from time to time being criticised for the amount of money that's being diverted into overseas aid. I disagree totally. I think it's a really good thing to do. I guess you'd expect me to say that. I've done a lot of that. But it's good for the UK to provide aid to these overseas countries, because a whole heap of other countries simply do not.
Okay. Were there any American naval vessels being volunteered
for
this?
No, I'm pleased to say there were.
There were.
We, as Brits, we were not involved with those, but no, of course there were.
There were?
Yes.
Okay, all right, just checking there. So you get diverted at the last minute. They need you because of your orthopedic specialty.
That's right, yes.
And it's a nearby hospital. Are you all going on trucks and vehicles?
No. I mean, we're in Cebu.
Okay.
Now, Cebu is it is distant from Tacloban. It's about 45 minutes flight from there.
Okay.
And so suddenly my half of the 12-man team, we're now down to 6, is tasked to go to Tacloban rather than to go on the ship. We arrive at Cebu Airport, and there's a pile of people trying to get there, a lot of aid agencies trying to get there. I had a wonderful experience when I had a tap on my shoulder, totally unexpectedly check-in, and there was my son, who had been tasked by Reuters TV to go and report on Tacloban. So there was a most unexpected father-son reunion in an airport. So off we go. He's on a different flight, I should hasten to add.
Okay.
And we arrive in Tacloban, and when you fly over the Philippines, there you are, let's say at 15,000, 20,000 feet. They look wonderful. And you couldn't tell from the sky what the damage was at all, unless you were trained, and I certainly couldn't tell. As you come down lower and lower and lower, you really begin to see the enormity of what happened. And you want to imagine total destruction. I mean, I don't mean just a few houses down. The only properties I saw intact were 2 churches made of stone. Okay, the rest were completely trashed. Imagine everything destroyed from the shore inwards for a fair distance.
And does that bother you when you see that, or are you conditioned to expect that, or does part of you, does it get you down, or does it kind of get you excited to go and go to work?
No, it's. I remember that feeling right now. I mean, you can never get used to that. You can never accept it as normal. It's never something which you can relax when you see. I remember as I hit that tarmac, having seen all that from the air, you really wanted to go and do something there and then. Right. You've been in Manila and you'd thought, what was all the fuss about? That had changed just like a light switch. The moment you got into Tacloban, everything was destroyed.
Right. And that's another question I want to ask you. How do you control like the adrenaline dump? Because you're in Heathrow getting a briefing, but now you have to wait 20 hours. And then you're in Manila and everything looks fine. And then you have to go here. And then you have to go here. And I'm sure you see it in your colleagues who may have less experience than you, or maybe more. Doubtful. But how do you control your emotions? Is there anything you use, or do you meditate, or how do you do that?
No, well, I mean, it can be emotional, mind you. I have to say, when you've travelled for 20 hours, actually, it'll flatten most emotions out. And now I've been used to that in the services. We used to call it in the services, "hurry up and wait," or on the bus, off the bus, on the bus, off the bus. Things change a lot. You just have to get used. I mean, I suppose in my UK practice, I think I'm fairly positive about the way I exist and practice. I think I try and direct my practice in a fairly positive way. You can't really be the same sort of character in a disaster, because you are slightly governed by events. You may think you're going to be in a particular location at, say, 9 o'clock in the morning, and you suddenly find you're somewhere completely different and it's midday. So that's the way you have to be in a disaster. You have to know when it's right to turn that switch and act suddenly. In the act of traveling, generally you don't. You just go with it, and when you get there, you rest as much as you can. I've taken a lot of photographs of the team going out there. There's a lot of sleeping going on. Everyone's just relaxing, just getting themselves ready for the task they know they're going to have to do.
Okay. You land on the airport. What do you see right away? And what do you think to yourself the first thing you need to do?
Well, show me a patient, I guess is what you say, and, which is totally logical, because of course you don't have equipment with you in your hands at that moment.
Right.
The airport is destroyed. the airport terminal building is destroyed. Outside the airport terminal building, there's a whole pile of aid which has been flown in, I believe, by the Americans. And so there is aid already coming in. There are Herculeses there with engines running. They're taking aid off. There are refugees going back on.
Hercules are planes?
Hercules, the C-130.
Okay.
Sort of the workhorse of the sky.
Okay. So people going on and aid coming out in crates and
yes, exactly that. There are Ospreys, these sort of two-engined aircraft. There's special forces soldiers on four-wheel all-terrain vehicles. All sorts of things are going on, and you are forming part of that. So you really feel you're part of a big machine. Now, actually, as you get in there, you begin to realize there may be a big machine at the airport, but very little of it has actually made it inland. Now, we were actually quite fortunate because, in fact, the people who had requested our assistance were the Australians. And so we formed part of the team belonging to what's called AUSMAT, which is Australian Medical Assistance Team. Now, this was their first real-life operational deployment, and they were wonderful to work with. The only point of disagreement was the test match. Everything else we agreed about. And they ran it in a very, very good way. So it was an excellent place to work.
Okay, and your first 24 hours there, what happened?
Complete mayhem. Firstly, you're getting acclimatized, but at the same time, you can't really get acclimatized because you just got to get in there. So the first thing we did, we're met at the airport, we're taken to a tented Australian field hospital because all the other hospitals have been destroyed, within Tacloban, and they're gradually being swept out, and they're trying to get them back to life. But imagine a series of tents over an area maybe of 3 acres, 4 acres, a couple of hectares, that sort of thing. The whole area is concrete. The first action was to put our tents up, and the tents were single tents. You had a tent to yourself on concrete, which didn't drain, and so you're sleeping in your own accommodation that you've erected yourself, you're washing for yourself, you're cleaning for yourself, you're cooking for yourself. So a lot of it is setting up your own personal survival system before you treat the patients. You've probably got 35, 40 minutes to do that, get yourself sorted, and then we were in theatre, the operating theatre, within 45 minutes of arriving.
45 minutes
Within 45 minutes we were operating, yes we were. And imagine a long tent, imagine a tent, let's say 30 meters long by 15 meters wide. In that, it's air conditioned. You've got 2 operating tables in that area, and patients are coming in about, I would say, 200, 250 a day are coming through. This particular typhoon, it lasted 16 hours. Now, firstly, your house collapses. Okay, so if you're in the house and you've been hit by some falling debris, you then get a storm surge, and with that, a lot of debris comes through. So a lot of it was, let's say, corrugated iron debris, corrugated iron lacerations we've had.
Comes flying through the air after your house has been destroyed.
That's right, or even through the water.
Okay.
And so a lot of corrugated iron lacerations. And of course, the water is contaminated, and so you can't just close up or suture up a wound when you have that contamination, because you know if you do, you're going to harbour an infection. And so you leave it open, you clean it, you send the patient back to their bed, you then bring them back 2 days later, and you look again. You keep on cleaning and cleaning and cleaning, and when you're happy the wound is totally clean, that is when you close it. Okay. So that patient may require 4 or 5 different operations at 2-day intervals before they eventually end up with a closed wound.
Which is different than what would happen in Haiti. That wouldn't have to be the case as far as that infection by humidity and by moisture.
Well, no, infection by debris and dirt in Haiti, of course. Okay. So infection is the big victim, and one of the problems I think of a lot of teams that go into these places, they may be in for a short period of time, and so they try and suture wounds up on day one, which is generally the wrong thing to do. Of all the patients I saw, of all the patients we operated on, I only sewed up 1 wound primarily. Every other wound we left open and then sutured up secondarily. This 1 wound, and I have no idea why it was unaffected. This was an elderly man, and he came to see me, I think, about 11 days after the typhoon, and he had a corrugated iron laceration to his thigh, and somehow he kept it clean. I have no idea how. I looked at it. It was perfectly clean. He was sitting there in the accident emergency tent with his dirty hand in the wound. He had every reason to be infected, but it wasn't, and so we closed it up.
Are you talking to these people, or are they only speaking speak Spanish? What kind of communication do you have?
We have local. English is spoken to a limited extent in the more by the more educated people, but we had local interpreters with us, and so there was a wonderful interpreter called Manny who could. I think he was so good at interpreting, he almost became an honorary doctor by the time we'd finished.
Okay, so 250 patients a day.
Yes,
that's quite a lot. Are you going out and triaging them, or are you staying in operating theater? Are there other people doing those things?
No, what happens is, you have a process called triage, okay? And so any patient comes in and they go to a triage tent first of all. They will see, not me, they'll see a very senior nurse or a midwife, somebody who's got a lot of experience in life and in surgery and in medicine. And at that point, they'll be given a categorization. They then get brought in and they see a doctor, and that doctor will commence treatment if it can be treated conservatively, or at that particular point, he can make a decision about surgery, or if he's still struggling, he'll come put his head around the door of the operating tent and say, look, will you come out between the cases and look at this case I've got for you? So it's a combination of being fed by others and making final decisions for yourself. Because yes, for example, I'm a hip and knee surgeon in the UK. So let's say, I'll give you one example. An elderly man comes in and he has broken his hip bone. Okay. Now, he hasn't actually broken his hip bone in the Typhoon. He's broken it before the Typhoon. But he sees there's a Brit doctor there. Let's give it a go. Now, he is in a bad way, and I look at his X-ray because we have tented X-ray facility.
Okay.
And I simply look at it and I say, you need a new hip. You need an artificial hip. But I do millions of those back in the UK. I wouldn't do one out there because clearly it would be contaminated. So there's me faced with a patient directly in my mainstream specialty, and I wouldn't do him because it would be inappropriate that I did. So there's a triage process that is based not only on the severity of injury, but also on the facilities you've got, and do you have the right kit? We didn't have the kit to do that, and it would have been inappropriate to have done it on that basis.
I keep thinking of that television series MASH. I don't know if you ever used to watch MASH. You know, it was about these surgeons that I think were in the Korean War,
yes.
And they were all in the same theater operating together, and sometimes they were literally, the bombs would come off and dust would come down, and they were hovering over their patients so the dust wouldn't get in the operating theater. How professional is the setup there, or are there concerns about sterility and all these other things?
Now, the setup, the theatre tent is sacrosanct. Unless you've got business to go in that theatre tent, you simply do not go in that theatre tent. So we had business to be in there, and so we did. Now, the wards are different. Yes, they're sacrosanct, but more people will go on the wards because clearly the wounds have got dressings on, and so the chances of getting contaminated and infected are much, much lower. And indeed, one of the strong points of this particular facility was that every morning at 6:30 a.m., the whole hospital would do a ward round. And so you would go round, and you as the surgeon would present the cases that you'd done the previous day to your colleagues. They would ask you questions, and by golly, if you couldn't answer them, then you really ought to have a reason for not answering them. And so that was really good for the patients. And so if, for example, a patient had a fever of unknown etiology, unknown cause, and you thought it might be due to your surgery, one of the physicians would pipe up and say, had you thought of malaria, or had you thought of leptospirosis, and so on. So it's quite good to have a debate, and the patients would benefit as a result.
Okay. Are you learning things in those scenarios?
Of course you're learning things.
Okay.
You're teaching and you're learning. And you have so many specialties there. Yes, you have orthopedic surgeons, you have vascular surgeons, you have general surgeons, you've got plastic surgeons, you've got physicians. And so on that basis, you're teaching each other the things you need to know.
Those first 24 hours, how many surgeries did you perform?
I think that first day, I think we got through 21, which is quite a lot for one operating room. It probably doesn't sound very many.
No, it sounds like a lot.
But it sounds. If I tell you that when I'm really working hard in the UK, if I do 6 in a day, I'm doing well. So we're doing 21. That's a lot. Now, one of the problems, of course, of doing 21 is because you're not necessarily closing all those wounds the first time round, they go back to the ward, they then come back again. And so day in, day out, gradually the numbers you are doing are increasing because not only are you getting new casualties in, but you're also treating the old ones. And so your wards start to get fuller and so on. So there's a logistic issue. So the aim is to get patients out as soon as you possibly can.
Did you have anyone die on you when you're there?
Sadly, we did. Yeah, we did. It's a problem. People see a hospital. Okay, it's a tented hospital. They see a lot of well-trained doctors, and they want their advice. But often they seek their advice too late. And some people are unsalvageable. You do your best for them, but you don't always win.
And that's because infection set in, or they're just too much bleeding, or just something from a wound.
Well, I mean, there are different causes, really. But I mean, generally, if you bleed a lot, then even if you bleed slowly, if you bleed rapidly, you die from blood loss, of course, don't you? But if you bleed slowly, you can still bleed, you can still die, because you start to lose the ability to fight infection, and so you can just generally be overcome and overwhelmed. And so clearly we would like to get people as early after injury as we possibly can. But if we're seeing them a week or 7 or 8 days because the logistics, communications are so bad, it gets very hard to treat them. And then in addition to that, every operation you do is another surgical stress on that patient. And I can remember one young child, he's about 5, and he'd actually had a corrugated iron injury. He'd sustained a below-knee amputation on one leg. It's a terrible thing in a fight to see that in a 5-year-old, and a major nerve damage on the other leg. And his blood count must have been down in his boots, and literally the blood was like water. You normally expect blood to be slightly treacly and thick. I'm used to that. This was really thin and really like water, and you knew this child was going to find it very difficult to either survive, or he was going to find it very, very difficult to heal. Now, as I left him, when we left, at the end of the day, he was still doing okay. But, you worry about it. Every single operation is another assault on this poor individual.
We've had a soldier here who suffered from PTSD. He had done a tour in Afghanistan and one in Iraq, and his name is Jake Wood. And he would talk about in the territorial armor going over there and having these intense experiences, in theater, in war, and then coming back to a bank. And, in your practice, in your hip and knee surgery, you don't deal with people that die. But then you go over here for 2 weeks and you see this craziness. You see patients die, and then you have to come back, and now you're wearing a suit and you're talking to me. Yes. Is there some really strange elements that maybe are hard for you to deal with between those two worlds?
It is. It takes a lot of time to get acclimatized to that. And in fact, I think the people who notice it more are my family. You to the outside world, I just look like me. But
you're a pretty cool guy, so.
Well, I don't feel that. But certainly my family sees the difference in me.
They could just see you behaving a little bit different.
Yeah, I think so. I think they give me space. I think they do. They understand now that it takes a few days to wind down. It sometimes takes a few weeks to wind down, to be honest with you. And as I sit and talk to you now, I can still see in my mind certain scenes which I would rather not have seen. But at the time you're dealing with them, you don't feel that. I mean, I think that's quite important for the patient. In a way, when the patient is there, you are on autopilot. You just do what you're trained to do and what you're used to do. You do the best you can. It's only afterwards you sort of sit down and you realize what you've done. And I guess the guy with the PTSD may well have been exactly the same.
Yeah, it could be years before you kind of process all that information.
Sure.
How do you know when to stop that first day when you're on surgery number 21 and everything's happening and you want to probably stay up all night for 3 days and fix everyone? Is there someone that comes and taps you on the shoulder and is just like, Richard, it's time for you to get some sleep? Or do you know yourself when things are getting blurry where you're like, I need to take a break and let someone else come in?
Well, when things are getting blurry. Actually, owning up to that is difficult. So actually because you want to keep going, don't you? You want to keep going because you simply want to keep going. You keep going because you want to be seen to keep going, I guess. We have people around and we just keep an eye on each other. So you go as a team. And one of the delights is, there's a wonderful theatre sister we took with us called Geraldine. And Geraldine, fantastic, very quiet spoken, but every word she said was key. She'd been around a long time. She'd done all sorts of surgery. And when Geraldine said, look, you're tired or you're not doing things the way she felt was appropriate, she would just tell you and you would just buy time. There was also a clinical director to the hospital, and his sole job was to keep the troops right. So if he saw somebody who was not performing well, he'd take them out, give them some sleep, and bring them back in 12 hours later.
Okay. Go ahead.
So there's always somebody keeping an eye on somebody. You don't want any. If you see somebody sitting all by themselves out in a corner, sort of writing a letter home or whatever it may be, then basically you want to worry. There's something going on.
Okay, so go talk to him.
Yeah, sure.
How much sleep do you get that first night, and is sleeping hard for you?
We did a wonderful calculation because basically you get very little sleep. We did a calculation for the whole team when we were out there. We said, okay, let's average it up over 4 days, over this 4-day period, and the average was 3 hours and 59 minutes. So that's per night.
That's not healthy.
It's not healthy. It's not. But but you cat nap as you go along, and you just keep things short, have a snooze between operating sessions, and so on. And yes, you have a pile of patients waiting for you, but often there's a bit of a gap where you can just get a little little bit of head down, bit of shut eye, and start again.
Okay. Are there big logistical gaps that you see right away when you're there? Are you like, okay, we've got, this, do we need double the amount of space at hospital? Do we need more water because there's no water? Do we need that x-ray machine because it just broke and I can't do surgery without it? Are there like things that are big bottlenecks in the process?
I say bottlenecks, maybe. I mean, we ran out of kit. Okay, I mean, I think after we were operating for 3 days, we ran out of a lot of equipment. So, for example, surgical gowns, we ran out of surgical gowns. So you improvise. We get some, we order for some to come, but of course the runway is a problem and getting stuff to us is difficult. So in the interim, we have to improvise. So we simply use plastic aprons. We run out of towels to dry our hands with. So in that case, normally a surgeon would scrub his hands from fingertips right down to elbows. Now, if you go down to the elbow, you need a towel to dry yourself. If you just wash your hands, then you can just wave them in the air till they're dry. And so that's what we did. So we just washed the hands. So there are certain corners you can cut, which are not ideal corners to cut, but in the circumstances are probably the right thing to do. We ran out of drapes. These are the paper drapes or the cloth drapes you use to, as it were, barrier off the area in which you're operating. And so we simply used the paper from the glove wrappers, and we simply cut holes in those and stuck them over the wound. So we improvised as best we could.
Okay. Now take me through the next, say, 5 days. Are things getting better? Are they getting worse? More patients coming in or less? I guess everything's changing by the hour.
Well, yeah, sure, they are changing by the hour because you see, you have a hospital in place. You've got great Australian doctors there. You've got great British doctors there, and people get to hear of it. There is no other hospital like it working at that time in that area. We've got the Americans force services bringing patients into us in that location. They obviously take their own servicemen elsewhere, but the civilians came to us. So we're getting a lot of people coming in, a lot of helicopter casualties being brought in. I should add that you don't want to put I have to say, the toilet tents near the helicopter landing pad. I found that out to my cost. That's a totally different.
Was that on a different mission?
No, on this particular mission. No,
was that your call to put the toilets near the helicopter?
I can disclaim responsibility for putting them there, but I can claim responsibility for being sat on one when the helicopter landed. It's not a pleasant experience.
As in everything, the cover goes?
You are exposed to the world. Don't go there. But
you have any pictures of that?
No, sadly no, or happily no, perhaps.
All right. I will want some pictures. We're going to put them up on the site and maybe while this video is playing.
No, that's right. We can certainly provide this for you. But the things change. In the early days, in the first few days after the typhoon, you're getting acute injuries. All right, things which require cleaning and closure. They require general surgical and, let's say, orthopedic bone and joint skills. Then as the days go by, that changes and there's less requirement for those sort of skills, and at that point you want plastic surgery, or you want someone who can cover wounds. One imagines when there's a laceration or a cut, you can always sew it together. You can't always do that. Sometimes you have to simply cover it with a skin graft because it's not closable. Okay. So that's the skill of the plastic surgeon, or in our case, for ourselves, because again we're trained to do that to a certain basic level. And then when that changes, of course, you start to get less surgical and you start to require more physicians. So let's say public health are dealing with epidemics and trying to avoid those, starting vaccination campaigns and so on. And then you get into community health education. So the thing changes on a daily basis. And the job, I think, of the disaster doc is to predict what is going to be required in 2 or 3 days' time, because it's going to take all of that time to get those people out from their home countries.
Okay. And are you ordering supplies based on what you think you're going to need?
Yes, you are.
And are more staff coming in, or is like the core team stays the core team?
Well, no, more staff are being stood by. So, for example, the Australian team was standing by a second team in Australia. The British team, we were standing by a second team in the UK. It's just the composition of that team was different. The first team was highly surgical. The second team would be more medical. And by the time we were coming to an end of our tour, I would say 60, maybe 70% of the cases coming in were medical. They were not surgical. Okay. In the early days, you could say 60 or 70% were surgical, and the minority were medical. So things were beginning to change, for sure.
Is that how you know it's going to be time for you to leave soon?
Yes, you do. That's right. And so you think, okay, now we're now getting in control. We no longer need 4 surgeons. We need 2. We need 1. Let's start getting some people stood down. That's why I say to my secretaries back home, only cancel a week at a time, because what happens basically is we get to the Thursday the week before, and if they've not heard from me, they cancel the next week, but they never cancel beyond that. So we only ever lose 1 week at a time.
Okay, because and is it shorter than you always think? When you're saying I'm going to the Philippines because of the typhoon, do most people think this is going to be months, but you know it's actually going to be a shorter time?
No, I mean you prepare yourself for 6 weeks. I mean, I guess I'm committed to 6 weeks, but in fact, when you get there, you realise this is not going to be 6 weeks. It may well be a 6-week aid program, but it won't be a 6-week aid program affecting me. My job, as it was with Haiti and others, is to be in there as early as I can humanly be, because that's when I'm most used. And as we get further away from the event, so I get sort of less used to the aid program generally.
It almost is a feedback loop on itself. I mean, you need to be there as soon as possible, and then almost after 4 or 5 days, you're almost de facto not needed anymore, right? Because you've treated all the patients you can.
Yes.
If someone was in an area where they couldn't be reached by you, it might be too late, and then it's going to be medical concerns after that.
Yes, exactly that, exactly that. So, and right now, you know, I mean, yes, there is a surgical requirement in Tacloban in the Philippines as we speak, but it's a very different surgical requirement to the one that I was able to provide.
Okay. Were you guys the best surgical hospital in the country, would you say?
I think, bearing in mind you're going to go out to hundreds of millions of people, I wouldn't dream of rating us, but I think we were very good. And from my viewpoint, the Australians were a privilege to work with. They really were.
Wow, that's going to mend a lot of ties here, you know, between the two nations.
Well,
so.
I don't think there are any ties to be mended. I mean, I think you know, the Australians and the Brits have always seen eye to eye. We have a very similar sense of humour. I think it takes the world finds the British sense of humour very strange, but actually the Australians and the New Zealanders understand it greatly.
Okay, they get it. And so the only thing I wanted to ask is, would your team ever be picked up and moved somewhere after, say, 4 or 5 days? Or like I said, is it pretty much that once you set up camp, you must have to really choose the place you set up very importantly, because you know you're going to be there for a while. You're going to attract a lot of people. Would you ever move, or would they ever call you away to go somewhere 100 miles away? Or does that rarely happen in your deployments?
The answer is it rarely happens, but the fact is you are trained to do that. I mean, you have to. And it's probably why, if you look at the team we had, there's a very high proportion of ex-military or ex-Navy people in that. You had to be prepared to move, and so you keep your equipment packed at all times. Even if you think you're in a lovely tented hospital, you keep your equipment packed at all times. You have the so-called grab bag, which is the small bag with all your vital possessions in it, because you never really know if security is going to take a turn for the worse. You know, you're in an area where there's a curfew, where you have armed police around, where there has been conflict going on in country even before the disaster.
They have some very interesting political conflict.
Oh, they do.
It's quite a violent place. There are a lot of handguns and guns
there
in the
are,
Philippines.
and we saw a fair few. Okay. And no, you have to live with that. And your neutrality is very important. I mean, medics are targeted worldwide to this day, and more so these days than they have been. And so you have to be very, very aware of what's going on around you, yet in many respects not show that you're aware. You know, you are focusing on the patient, but in the back of your mind all the time is security.
Why are medics a target?
Well, I think medics are a target because we are seen, rightly or wrongly, as representing the country from which we come. Okay. And I don't necessarily approve of that, but that is the reality. And so you have to be aware of that at all times.
And what was safety like? Were you concerned at all? How did it rate to Haiti? I don't know why I keep going back to Haiti, just because I guess that's fresh in my mind and I'd seen pictures and images. But how was the danger level and the security in comparison to the place you've been?
I think Haiti was more insecure than where I've just been, to be honest with you. We had a security team who were looking after us, an ex-military security team, and they would advise if they saw people walking around who shouldn't be there, then they would move them quietly to one side. So they were very, very aware. And so in many respects, you could relax. Now and again, the security guy would come up and tap you on the shoulder and say, look, Doc, be careful about that, or whatever it may be. But generally, we were well looked after, for sure.
And the way you carry yourself is very important. You need to act as if you are feeling safe and feeling, you need to not cower away. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, I think if you are relaxed, if you're externally relaxed, then the people you're with are also externally relaxed. You don't want to pose a threat or be seen to pose a threat. Okay. And so, I have great political views in the UK, but over in those parts of the world, I express no political views at all. You do not take sides. Your job is there to treat all comers. It doesn't matter where they're from.
Okay. Talk to me about communications. Can you call your son up on your mobile phone? Can you email people? It sounds like you weren't communicating with your practice here in the UK. They just assume you're not coming back if you don't call them by a certain date. What's it like?
Well, when the disasters first start, there's zero communication. Everything goes, mobile goes, internet goes, and so on. We were given local mobile telephones as we arrived in Manila, so we're armed with a local mobile telephone. We can talk to each other on the assumption there is mobile signal. By the time we got to Tacloban, there was a degree of mobile signal. There was absolutely zero internet altogether, and I hadn't realised how dependent on the internet I've become in many respects. And so when you're talking about communicating back to UK, things you were writing, messages you wanted to send simply were not possible. So it cost me an absolute fortune in mobile telephone calls by the end.
All right, so you were calling people.
I was calling people in the end.
Is that an important part? I'm curious if in your earlier days you would just shut off and focus on the mission in hand for a week and not talk to your family. Maybe I'm just assuming. Now do you understand that it's a part of coping with the situation that you do call these people? And
no, it is. I mean, keeping contact with home is important. Keeping contact with family, if you can, is important. Because you remember, you leave your wife and family at home. Every time there's a disaster on the news, they presume it's you. Now, that disaster that security breach may have been 100 miles away, but as far as they're aware, it is you. And so keeping contact is actually extremely important.
To assure them or for you?
Well, I think both of us, really. I mean, okay. But I remember after Haiti, coming back to UK and going into my apartment in London and seeing my dear wife, and she had listened to every single news bulletin while I had been away. She knew more about Haiti than I did. I was there immersed in it, right. Dealing in my little area of activity, doing the best I could. She was seeing the much bigger picture, which, to be quite honest, was much more frightening. At a personal level, in Haiti, it was a very, very insecure environment. We had, as it were, allied ourselves with a local individual who was, as it were, our protector, and he did that extremely well. In Tacloban, again, we had security provided, and that was fine.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you, when you're over there and you are making those calls home, do you try not to get in the details? I'm sure people probably really want to know what's going on, but do you find that you don't want to dwell on a lot of the hardships just to keep yourself from kind of going to that space and just to keep it less business and more personal?
Well, I think if you're talking to people who are not part of the family, they want to know what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. If you're talking to the family, they don't really want to know what you're doing. They just want to know what, in my case, the husband or daddy is. What's he like? What's he feeling like? They want actually to share their problems with you.
Right.
And so actually, it's not unknown to ring from a disaster area when you've already had X deaths and heaven knows what else. You're surrounded by chaos. To actually be told, look, the gas bill needs paying. And, so you have to handle that.
That's the real disaster.
maybe.
So how long were you there for? How many days? And when did you know you were going to leave?
We were there for 12 days, and we knew we were going to leave about literally 36 hours before we left. We knew we were going to have to leave. Now, the leaving is not as easy as it sounds, because remember, you're in a destroyed area, Tacloban. Every single flight is booked for weeks ahead. You've got some C-130s, some Hercules is going out, and so it was a matter of doing the best we could to go out with the refugees. Now, I actually took a refugee flight out, and that was an experience I wouldn't want to repeat, I have to say.
What was that like?
Horrendous. And I mean, horrendous as the doctor with me. I don't mean it was uncomfortable. Yes, it was. I mean, a Hercules, I don't know how many people it's designed to take, but this one had at least 120 on board. We were standing.
No seat belts.
You're not seated. I mean, a few casualties were seated, but everyone was stood for the whole flight. That's takeoff, on the cruise, and landing. In turbulence, you are stood. Now, I basically, so you're shoulder to shoulder, I found a little corner where I could sit down. And I've described a thing called refugee foot, I have to say. And refugee foot was basically, I sat down, there was a woman beside me with a couple of kids, and she wanted to sit down, so she said to me in broken English, would she mind if she sat down on the floor beside me? I said, feel free. So she sat down, but she sat down on my foot. And I didn't know quite what to say. You're sat on my foot, madam, but I thought I'd just let her sit there. She wasn't the lightest individual in the world, and she sat there for 2 hours, and my foot is numb to this day.
On your foot?
She sat on my foot for 2 hours. I had no blood to my toes for 2 hours. I didn't really know what to say, and I didn't really want to get her to move because she was so exhausted. She had these 2 children who were really screaming the house down, and you felt terribly sorry. These people were leaving an area where this had been their home. They were leaving behind them families and friends, one presumed, awful memories, and they were going somewhere to a future they couldn't really predict. It was one of those scenes out of a movie. Really drew at the heartstrings. You really wanted to cry yourself. To be honest, there was a lot of tears on that flight.
And the spirits were very down.
One or two. I mean, it was interesting. A lot of young people. I remember talking to one of our very well-known BBC correspondents many years back, and she said that she had noticed after disasters that people between the ages of roughly 18 and 35 years were predominated. The very young and the very old were no longer there. And that's quite true, because the very young had died, the very old had died.
Okay.
But between 18 and 35, they had a survival instinct which sort of got them going, held them together. That Hercules was filled with a lot of 18 to 35-year-olds. There was some elderly. And there was a lot of families too, mothers with children, like the young lady who sat at my foot. That's terribly sad to see. They are a whole life change with no predictable future.
And probably less equipped emotionally to deal with it than the older people who've probably seen a few things in their years. And I mean, this is probably the biggest event of their life.
Oh, for sure. And one that would remain with them for the rest of time. But I guess for the 18 to 35-year-olds, maybe the 18 to 20-year-olds, at least they have got their health. At least they've got a future they can try. There's a sort of lovely optimism at that age, I think, isn't there? Where the whole world is open to you, which is a wonderful thing to have. And I guess they had that.
I want to ask you a question. It's something about myself. I mean, I heard the reports about the Philippines and then heard the reports about the Philippines. And then I got something, quite honestly, that was probably Philippine news fatigue. And I know that this happens at times in conflict places in Africa, or it happens, with the Iraqi war, where Americans hear about it so much that all of a sudden you kind of tune it out. And I had a hard time placing myself there and trying to understand what was going on. And I wonder, do you find that with people with disaster areas that it's hard to really communicate with the public what's really going on, or the urgency of it? And do you find that frustrating?
I do, in a way. I mean, when you come to these things, yes, you form part of this great sort of lift of hope and desire to assist. But even though you're there for a short period at the start, by the time you come back, the media, the news will have moved on to something totally different. I think the charities, the NGOs, like the world to know what's going on, because obviously there's a lot of money that comes in at that particular time.
Yeah.
And that money is used for that particular aid program and to roll it onwards for the months and years that follow. So it's important actually to get the message out. And I think people, in some respects, are slightly suspicious of the media. I really support it, because actually it's a two-pronged attack here. You've got people like me that provide the aid. You've got the media that are getting the message out about that aid. Now, I'm a hopeless message passer, but the media basically get that message out. So it's good to involve them, I think, in those early days. I think they do a lot more good than they think they do.
What was the one thing that surprised you about your whole tour this time in the Philippines, in a good way and in a bad way? Something that you just didn't expect to happen on both sides?
Well, I mean, the bad way for me was the children. I mean, it's difficult to deal with children who are injured. I'm a father of 3 myself, and in every child you see your own child. And so, yes, I've seen children in previous disasters, but I don't know whether it was because it was Save the Children or because it was just the way it was, but there were a lot of children we treated, and that was hard to deal with, I think. The best thing was I was required on this occasion to do a lot more other than just orthopedic surgery, which is what I do back in the UK. And it was nice to find I could still do it, and the skills I had learned many years ago still applied today.
What kind of things were you doing?
Well, I mean, a lot of foot surgery. I mean, I do hip and knee surgery, for example. So I'm doing a lot of feet. We're doing skull fractures. We're doing all pelvic fractures. Yes, I guess I deal with those in the UK too. Spinal fractures. Things which I don't normally deal with back home, but I was obliged to deal with there. And it went well, and I was pleased that it did.
How do you rate the overall international community for their response to the Philippines? And then, like, from just you personally, from what you guys saw, are there anything that you would do different if this were to happen again in a year?
No, well, I mean, the international community is getting better at it. It is. Okay. I mean, there's still faults. It's still difficult to get there quickly enough. I don't quite know how you can get there any quicker than we did. But if I compare, let's say, the Philippines in 2013 with Kashmir in 2005, it's chalk and cheese. 2005, the international community was really found wanting, to be honest with you. The Philippines, yes, there were problems, but far fewer. And I think the disaster relief has become slightly more professionalised. You know, we now are heading towards surgeons and physicians being qualified in disaster relief. We haven't quite got there yet, but training, special training is now provided. You know, the College of Surgeons, thanks to a good colleague, David Knott, has put together a programme called STAE, Surgical Training for Austere Environments. And this is training people like me, let's say who are specialists in the UK, to do general types of work, because in that part of the world, you can't be fussy. You have to deal with everything that comes through the door. And so the international community is a lot better now than it used to be. In terms of what would happen next time, I think the one thing I would want is somebody there even before we got there. You know, we got there very early, but you know, we want to insert people as rapidly as possible into these areas to report back. So you need very good communications by specialists. You need medics on the ground, not just administrators. You need medics there, not just to do, but to assess and to report back at the earliest opportunity.
So maybe get people like you or with training much like you to go there right away and just start triaging the situation and then bring in the team. Maybe if those people were told they're not going to go in to actually operate and be the doctors and you were only in for 72 hours to assess, maybe they could get some people interested.
No, sure, no, exactly. But you need to insert people, so they need to be skilled at being inserted by whatever means are required. So now that's an area which needs work. It sort of exists, but we're looking at the medical surgical facility does exist. Now I say that exists for the Australians. The UK is bringing together as we speak, as it were, an Australian lookalike, which I think we can modify and maybe improve on slightly, but probably not much. Make it perhaps a little more specialist than the Australians provide, but that's not a criticism of Australia. It's simply the way the Brits are thinking and the skills we can offer. No, if we can have individuals in there really from minute one after the disaster, that would be brilliant, brilliant.
Now, the U.S., I mean, the Philippines is an ally of the U.S., the U.K., a lot of old school ties. Did that help the effort, or is it becoming more agnostic, the international community's response to all countries worldwide, in your opinion?
No, I mean, the answer is we all cooperate. You know, if you go to a disaster area, you have a British zone, an Australian zone, and a US zone, or whatever it may be. So there are areas that, and people are slightly territorial about it, but only slightly. In reality, you know you're all there together. There is a remarkable teamwork. I mean, as I was saying, for example, with the American helicopter pilots, service helicopter pilots, bringing civilian casualties to our hospital. So there's a great link there. Right. So we all agree. We argue a bit behind the scenes, but we actually all agree when it comes down to it.
I find that amazing to believe. I remember when you were here last time, we talked about Haiti, and famously Sean Penn went down there and he was doing a bunch of efforts, and you know, he likes to bitch a lot, but he was complaining that the Doctors Without Borders weren't communicating with these people and it was territorial. And I don't know how you organize things like that in such a disaster zone when different organizations are involved and ultimately egos. I know you're all there for one mission, but it seems like it must be impossible to you know, chart out territory.
Well, yes, but you have to know the system, I think. And I think if you go to your first one and only disaster, you would be very confused about it all, and you wouldn't quite understand what was going on. And it does seem to be totally uncoordinated. But actually, once you know how the system works, and that's the advantage of going to plenty of disasters, then you can cut through all the obstructions and go to the people that matter. You know, they have things called clusters. Every day, wherever the UN is based or the WHO is based, World Health Organization, you will have a cluster. And that's when all the representatives from the different agencies will come and they'll just talk to each other. There'll be a presentation and an update. So you get a feel for what's going on. It's never quite as informed as you'd like it to be, but it's a start. And so generally the first thing you do when you arrive at these places, you've got a little notebook, you're writing down names, you're writing down mobile telephone numbers, you're going to a cluster. I call it the cocktail party, where you're going from one person to another to another, you're making very, very rapid links. And that gives you the infrastructure that you need to make your particular bit of the operation work. But you're right, people don't communicate as much as they ought, but they probably communicate enough. In this wonderful world, there would be this wonderful hangar based somewhere, I don't know, in Malta or somewhere, which could fly anywhere in the world. But actually, it can't work that way, because remember, when there's a disaster, communications are down, so you can only guess at what is required, and you've then got to get this great monolith of a large field hospital into a disaster zone. That means you've got to land an aeroplane. All these things, which seem so simple back in UK or US or wherever it may be, but in practice are enormously difficult when the whole infrastructure has been destroyed.
Does your SAS training help you in these situations? And if so, what part of it?
Oh, enormously. I mean, it's taught me you're in a team, but you still have to look after yourself. It's a strange paradox, and you have to be comfortable in your own skin. It is stressful. You don't get much sleep, as I think we've already established.
Which sleep deprivation adds to your stress.
Sure. And so you have to know when to control yourself. Even though there's somebody around who's going to be keeping an eye on you, it's better you bail out before they bail you out, as it were. It teaches you to survive. It teaches you, I guess, to work with very little food inside you. It teaches you also that life is not predictable, that actually there are some forces even greater than those of the special forces, and that's nature. You just can't beat it. It teaches you basically just to deal with discomfort as best you can.
When you land back in the UK, what are the first few things you notice?
How lucky we are. It doesn't matter. I mean, how all those issues that I thought were big were actually very, very tiny. And I remember I arrived back in UK, and one of the first things that happened was I was stopped in London by a guard on the London Underground. And I was challenged for my Oyster card. This is the card. And so I got the Oyster card out, and this woman says to me, she says, "You haven't registered your Oyster card to get on the London Underground, and therefore you are going to be fined." Okay, and I looked at her at that point. This is the first greeting I had back in UK. And I was going to say, "Look, dear, I've just come back from the Philippines. I've just seen heaven knows how many fatalities." And I said, "No, I won't do that." No. Because to this individual, this was terribly important. But actually, it wasn't. Actually, what these poor Filipinos were going through was seriously important. There's no problem I've got back in UK that is as important as what they've got.
It's a very grounding experience. You're going to keep doing this for a while longer? Are you going to be on watch for another 5-10 years?
I have no idea. Look, I'm as old as time. But
you said that last time, and you refused to answer my question when I asked how old you were. I'm not going to try again.
Well, I mean, I had Tyrannosaurus Rex as a pet.
So no answer, but you are still on call right now.
I'm still on call at this very minute.
Do you get a break? I mean, do they know to give you a month off or 2 months off?
Well, I'm sure they do. They do now, and we're getting to a situation now when we're going to have sufficient teams, I think, in the UK, so we can be on 6 weekly standby. But at the moment, I'm on standby. If they want me, I'll go, and if they don't want me, I won't. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so back to business in the UK. You're back to your practice
right now, as if it never happened, but it did.
That is a very strange thing. We always ask the guests that come here, and I might have asked you before, I'm going to ask you again. If you could make a phone call, Richard, to the 20-year-old Richard Villar, I don't know if you were in the SAS at that point or not, and give that young man a bit of advice. After all you've seen and all the disasters you went and covered, what would you tell him, or what would you tell him to do differently?
I'd say to do differently, I think I would say listen to your elders more than I did, and I would also say never say no to anything.
Okay. All right. They say youth is wasted on the young. Actually, that's what old people say, right?
That's right.
On that same note, what's the best advice you've ever received, whether it be in the military, in your practice, or even in one of these disaster zones? You must have been green at one point in these things, and now you're probably one of the more experienced guys on those.
Yes, well, I think, people regard me as experienced. I regard myself still as learning. I mean, it's, what's the most useful bit of advice I've been given? I think it was by a very elderly and established surgeon. He simply said, follow your instinct. You may not be able to explain why you're doing what you're doing, but if your instinct says you do it, then you do it.
And that's very relevant when you're in those situations.
For sure, for sure.
Okay, and don't build the latrines next to the helipad.
Exactly.
Okay. On that final note, to the 20-year-old that's listening to this, that who knows, might want to go into the military or become a surgeon or potentially do something like that you're doing, what advice do you give to them? How can they prepare themselves for this, or should they get into it?
Well, I mean, I went into the military by firstly joining the Territorial Army, which is our reserve army, and then I joined the regulars. And so that's one way of learning. But I think that joining the military or joining the services is slightly outside the mainstream for a medic, even in this era now. Just be comfortable outside your rut. That's what I would say to him. If you want to do something, just do it.
And medicine, is it something you would choose again?
Oh, for sure, for sure. No, I love my job. I wake up to this day every morning. I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. And it sounds very corny, doesn't it? But
yes.
there's nothing better than watching a patient come through the door of your consulting room after surgery with a smile from ear to ear. And I can never tire of that, ever.
I've been very thankful to some surgeons in the past, definitely. It was interesting because before you came over, I was just picturing you and you being in the Philippines and just, being in an operating theater and cutting humans open. And it's so hard for me to conceive that you can do that and that you're skilled to do that and that you can keep your wits about you and heal these people. I know doctors are regarded as almost godlike figures in a way because of the magic you can perform, but I get it. It seems like a wonderful thing just to have that skill.
The moment you actually ever felt you're a godlike figure, then it's time to give up. I mean, we are but humans, well trained. I mean, there's a sensation which I don't think the public necessarily knows is when an operation is about to start, you've got all the preparation in the world, you've talked to all your colleagues, you've talked to the theatre sisters and theatre nurses, you've got all the instruments ready, and then you are stood by yourself by that patient. That's one-on-one, and there's no one you can call on. At that point, you are on your own. You're flying solo. And that's a responsibility which actually some people find very difficult to shoulder. And it gets to me occasionally even to this day. But it's a huge responsibility, which personally I take enormously seriously.
Right, very seriously every time.
Oh, for sure. Have to.
I believe you on that. Richard, you have a few books out. You've got Wing Scalpel, and then it was on a Knife Edge. Is that your previous book?
It was called Knife Edge.
Yes. Okay. Are you going to be writing any more books, or are you taking a break from that?
I love writing. I don't know what it is. I love writing.
When do you find the time to do this? You're off to Geneva tomorrow to go to a group of mountaineers. Is that true?
Yes. In my other life, I'm a mountaineer. I'm what's called an international mountain leader. We have our annual general meeting in Chamonix tomorrow, and so that's where I'm headed.
That's a tough life. You're very busy. When do you find time to write?
I write every day. I make sure that every day I write 1,000 words. I don't mind what I write. If I'm writing a book, that's the 1,000 words. Otherwise, it's a diary. Otherwise, it's a blog. Whatever it may be, I write 1,000 words a day. I have done for more than 15 years.
Man, I'm going to start making myself do that. You're making me better. That's good. Do you have a blog? Do you have people who can meet you, or they want to see your practice? How do they get a hold of you?
Well, my practice is based in Cambridge. I belong to something called the Villar practice. We do, basically, our job is we are a conservative surgical practice. That is, we try and conserve and preserve joints rather than replace them if we can. So we do a lot of biological stuff. For example, we've done the stem cell work now on hips and knees. And so there's quite a lot in the biological era. I mean, however good joint replacements are, and they are absolutely brilliant, in reality, if we can prevent people even needing one, so much the better. So that's really the thrust of the practice we run.
Okay. When I need my hip replaced or worked on, I'm going to come to you in a few years. Richard, thanks so much for coming on. You're always welcome here. And just thanks for giving us your thoughts. I was just really surprised and honored when we got a call from your assistant. So,
well, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's funny because we talk a lot about spirituality and consciousness, and you have a lot of Zen qualities about yourself. And when you go on these disaster reliefs, you come back with a real appreciation for what's around you. And it's very grounding, and it's a lot of what our show is all about. So go figure, an ex-SAS surgeon teaching us things on London Real. So if you want to follow Richard, you can follow him on Twitter. It's at Hip and Knee, or it's a Villar Badgeoir. They can.
I think it's at Villar. They find it at Villar Badgeoir. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. If you're watching us on iTunes, you can see both of us. Again, I've got someone else in a suit in my studio. It's been happening a few times lately, and you can see the extremely good-looking Mr. Richard Villar. We don't know his age, but he's not single. Neither am I. And please subscribe on iTunes. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. As we say on London Real, it's about the journey. Richard, I wish you well on yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
This week on London Real, we have hacktivist Arjen Kampfus.
If something in the crypto breaks, then it's all gone, and that'll be like a flash crash in literally minutes planet-wide. You allow a handful of countries to do industrial spying on an industrial scale all the time. It's not what the NSA can do, it's what the NSA knows. It's the information that they have about basically every major world history event since the early 60s. You don't catch terrorists by monitoring Facebook. Crypto-based, 100% peer-to-peer, 100% decentralized global currency, I think it has a big future.
Do you think Edward Snowden is a hero?
I think he's a hero in the sense that he very consciously made a choice to make his own life a hell of a lot more difficult for a greater good. So I think that's a pretty good definition.
On Sunday, London Real presents Aryan Campus, hacktivist.
Beautiful girlfriend, beautiful house in Hawaii. He was living in paradise. And he elected to dump all that, knowing full well that this was going to be the rest of his life.